Hi, welcome to part 5 in our segment related to Islamic art. Yes, this looks familiar. I am going to rediscuss the two Persian manuscripts that I talked about earlier um, related to the Book of Kings. I felt like I did a really bad job, and so I kind of wanted to maybe reiterate some things and clear some things up because these are two important pieces. I also included a piece that actually you don't have to know, so I just wanted to make it less confusing. So in this segment, we're still in West and Central Asia. So what we're going to be looking at are two sort of Persian manuscripts. Persian painting descends from a rich and very diverse heritage, including illustrated manuscripts from the Western Islamic world and figural ceramics from pre-Mongol Iran. The Mongolian rulers who conquered Iran in 1258 introduced exotic Chinese painting to the Iranian court in the late Middle Ages. Persian manuscript paintings, sometimes called miniatures, gave a visual image to a literary plot, rendering a more enjoyable and easier to understand text. A number of diverse schools of manuscript painting were cultivated throughout Persia, some more, others less, under the spell of this introduction of Chinese painting. Centuries after the Mongols, Chinese elements survive in Asiatic appearance of the figures. The incorporation of Chinese rocks and clouds and the appearance of motifs such as dragons and chrysanthemums. Persian miniatures in turn influenced Mughal manuscripts in India. Characteristics of many Persian manuscripts include a portrayal of figures in a relatively shadowless world, usually sumptuously dressed and occupying a richly decorative environment, which you can see here. The depiction of Bahram Ghor fights the Karg, which was some sort of, I guess, monster. And and so really it's sort of a combination of Asian elements as well as medieval European influences as well. Um, so with we can see how the Persian artist really admired the pattern and the detail and really the multicolored geometric patterns, which you can see depicted on his clothing. His clothing is considered European in style as well. Space is divided into a series of flat planes. So again, that loss of illusion. So, similar to sort of European medieval images that we looked at briefly with early Christian Byzantine, we see that loss or that sort of anti-classical approach to the figure, the loss of illusion. The marriage of text and calligraphy is especially stressed as the words are often written with consummate precision in spaces reserved for them on the page. And we kind of see that here. The viewer's point of view shifts in a world perceived at various angles. So again, there really is no like realistic illusion. It's sort of, depicted from, different points of view. So it's not realistic. So it seems that sometimes when we look at these figures, we're looking directly at some figures while also looking down at the floor and carpet. This is something that we'll see definitely with northern medieval depictions in art when we get to that historical period, and actually North Renaissance painting as well. Artists depict a lavishly ornamented architectural setting with crowded compositions of doll-like figures distinguished by a brilliant color palette. So I think you can see all of those represented in this page. So as you know, this is a one of a page or a folio from one of the most popular illustrated texts of the period, known as the Shahnameh or Book of Kings. It was an epic poem written by the poet Abu al-Qasim Firdusi in about 1010 CE. In the Shahnameh, the author recounts the myth, legend, and early history of Iran. So we see these sort of literary plots being represented and interpreted. We can interpret the text as a series of adventure stories and romances, but also as a guide to ethics and a chronicle and manual for royal conduct as well. There are 10 surviving illustrated Shahnameh manuscripts datable from approximately 1300 CE. Um, and This one, this is a folio that is from a celebrated copy of the text known as the Great Ilkhanad Shahnameh, one of the most complex masterpiece is considered one of the most complex masterpieces of Persian art because of its really lavish production. Remember, these books were considered luxury items. They were just, in today's world, they would probably cost just as much as a car or something equivalent to that, a house. They were very expensive to make. And so it was assumed to have been commissioned by a high-ranking member of the Ikhanad court and produced in a court scriptorium. And I did talk about that in the last segment about scriptoriums. The 57 surviving illustrations reflect the intense interest in historical chronicles in the experimental approach to painting of the Akhenad period between 1256 and 1335. So let me zoom in a little bit more. And so I think, we kind of see those elements I discussed earlier, the sort of infusion of European and Asian painting, in a completely different, culture, in the sort of Islamic culture. So again, this is an Iranian manuscript. It's largely the surface is largely painted, and the calligraphy actually is diminished here. So it's sort of the opposite, where the image is more profound than the calligraphy. We see those areas of flat color that we talked about as a convention. We sort of see that spatial recession indicated by overlapping planes, again, where it looks like we're viewing this from multiple perspectives. There is a use of something called atmospheric perspective, or an attempt to, seen in the light bluish background where it kind of gets a little hazy. This is this idea that things sort of fade and get less distinct in the distance. Bahram Ghor was an ancient Iranian king from the Sasanian dynasty. And he is supposed to represent the ideal king. And he wears a crown and a golden halo as well. So again, that looks very, very Christian right here, the halo. Karg, which is a unicorn he fought during his trip to India. Um, and so yeah, so just some things I wanted to point out is that he does wear a garment of European fabric, and that the elements of Chinese landscape painting conventions can be seen in the background. We haven't looked at Chinese landscape painting, but we will. Here is another page from another Shahnameh, or Book of Kings. And this book contains 258 illustrations. And so this particular page shows the first king, Gayumars, enthroned before his community. So on the left, his son, Salamek, and on the right, we see his grandson, Hushang. His court appears in a semicircle below him, and they are all in court attire, wearing leopard skins. So again, we kind of get that sort of sumptuous attention and detail to the fabric and clothing that the figures are wearing. And there is a harmony, and it's supposed to demonstrate this harmony between man and the landscape. We do see these sort of miniature details and that don't overwhelm the harmony of the scene. There is an angel, Shiraz, and he tells Guyamars that his son will be murdered by the Black Div, which is a demon. A div is a kind of demon, son of the demon Ahriman. So it is kind of a sad image to look at, because people who would be looking at this would know the story, and so would have that sort of sense of foreshadowing. But again, we see how the illustration takes prominence. The calligraphy, again, is much more minuscule. And again, this, this influence of, Asian or Chinese landscape painting. And then obviously, this kind of medieval approach to figures as well. It's really quite stunning, and the colors are absolutely gorgeous. I love the way the trees kind of break the frame, and kind of, the text overlaps it here. I think that's a really charming detail. Remember, this is really expensive paper that's infused with gold flakes as well. These manuscripts are really important too, because they really mark the synthesis of two important phases of the Persian tradition in manuscript painting. There were two styles: the Turkmen style, which developed in Tabriz, an area, and Shiraz, and the Timurid style, and this is associated with the Herat. So these are two other styles. And I know it's confusing because I don't, my history knowledge of Islam is not that great, so I'm trying the best I can. But what you should know, and what's really important, is that this work represents a synthesis of these two strains, and that they were absorbed into this new artistic idiom of this new group, the Safavids, Safavid, who were ruling at the time. And so we see the lively treatment and bright colors of landscapes inspired by the Turkmen school, coexisting with the more somber palette and balanced compositional layout of the Herat school. Um, and so this is why this particular manuscript in this page is very renowned. Something else that I want you to think about, we haven't, we're going to look at more medieval illuminations. We'll definitely be going back to Europe and looking at some illuminated manuscripts in Europe. And we'll compare and contrast Persian illumination and medieval European illumination. Um, and really what we'll see with medieval illumination is that those types of books are really to help illustrate the illiterate, or to help the illiterate because the population couldn't read. Um, which is quite different than the Islamic empire, which, everybody was literate. Safad Iran was going through a golden age of knowledge, education, art, and at the time, so literacy in the Muslim world was much better um, than medieval literacy um, in in other parts of the world. Illumination manuscripts instead were used to glorify and celebrate Persian culture in the Shahnameh. So again, it was more to kind of celebrate the power of these kings. Where when we look at medieval manuscripts, and we did in our last segment, we looked at some early Byzantine medieval manuscripts. And we see that those are more to explain or tell a narrative, or to, tell the stories of the Bible. So they function much differently. So we'll kind of go back to that point. All right. So now we're going to move on to Southeast and Southeast Asia. And the arts of Southeast and Southeast Asia represent some of the world's oldest, most diverse, and most sophisticated visual traditions. So we're going to be looking at the Islamic tradition in this case. We will be going back and looking at Hindu art and other traditions as well later in the year. So this beautiful structure, you should know what it's called, the beautiful Taj Mahal. This was done by Shah Jahan, who was the fifth ruler of the Mughal dynasty. During his third um, year in reigning, his favorite wife, known as Mumtaz Mahal, died during complications arising from the birth of her 14th child. deeply saddened, the emperor started planning the construction of a suitable permanent resting place for his beloved wife almost immediately. The result of his efforts and resources was the creation of what is called the Luminous Tomb in contemporary Mughal text, and what the world knows today as the Taj Mahal. In general terms, the Sunni Muslims in India favored a simple burial under an open sky. There were some exceptions of domed mausoleums that had been constructed for Mughals, as well as other Central Asian rulers that had been built prior to Shah Jahan's rule. So, in this regard, the Taj Mahal is not that unique. It is unique, however, in that it's an exceptional monument in scale, quite large for a mausoleum. It's has these beautiful, stunning gardens and this really lavish ornamentation and this overt use of white marble everywhere. As you can see, how it sort of looks like almost like a diamond. Um, so look at some different perspectives. Shah Jahan built the Taj Mahal in Agra, which, when he took the throne in 1628, he first this territory was first conquered by Muslim invaders in the 11th century. The city had been transformed into a flourishing area of trade during the Jahan's rule. Situated on the banks of the Yamuna River, allowed for easy access to water, and Agra soon earned the reputation as a riverfront garden city, on account of its meticulously planned gardens. So it had these very lush flowering bushes and fruit-bearing trees. If you can imagine how that must have looked in the 16th century. This is the entrance. So entry to the Taj Mahal complex via the court, the forecourt, which in the 16th century housed shops. And though a monument gate and through a monument gate of inlaid and highly decorated red stone made for the first impression of the grand splendor and symmetry. Aligned along a long water channel through this gate is the Taj, set majestically on a raised platform on the north end. The rectangular complex runs thoroughly, um, 1,860 feet on the north-south axis and 1,000 feet on the southwest axis. The white marbled mausoleum is flanked on either side by identical buildings. Let me see if I can. There, you can kind of see, that's a better image of that, um, in red sandstone. So normally when we see the picture, we don't see these other elements to the building. We're just kind of focused on the marble portion. One of these buildings serves as a mosque, and the other, whose exact function is unknown, provides sort of an architectural balance. So, it's very symmetrical. The marble structure is topped by a bulbous dome and surrounded by 4 minarets. These are these towers. We also see those in buildings related to mosques. Um, while minarets in Islamic architecture are usually associated with mosques for use by the muezzin, who leads the call to prayer, they are not functional but ornamental, once again underscoring the Mughal focus on structural balance and harmony. So the minarets in a mosque, this is where the muezzin, M-U-E-Z-Z-I-N, sort of the priest, what we would think of in Christian religion as a priest, would call everyone to prayer. So these again are just ornamental and used for balancing the symmetry of the structure. The interior floor plan of the Taj Mahal exhibits the Hash Bashish, which means 8 levels, principle, alluding to the 8 levels of paradise. consisting of 8 halls and side rooms connecting to the main space in a cross-axial plane. The favored design for Islamic architecture for the mid-15th century. The center of the main chamber holds Mumtaz Mahal's intricately decorated marble cenotaph on a raised platform. And so this was actually sort of like a sarcophagus or a burial um, chamber. The emperor's cenotaph was laid down beside hers after he died decades later. Both are encased in an octagonal of exquisitely carved white marble screens. The coffins bearing their remains lie in the spaces directly underneath the cenotaphs. So these are sort of like markers, and then the actual coffins are underneath these cenotaphs. Here's a floor plan of the complex. It's kind of confusing, especially when you see these different images, especially with the red sandstone structures that usually aren't included in the pictures. But so this was the entryway that you would go into, and this is made of red sandstone. And then obviously you have these beautiful gardens, and then you have the Taj here, and then you have these two sandstone structures, one being a mosque. And then here is another plan that kind of highlights the different um, functions of the different rooms. So here's the mosque. Um, here's the Taj Mahal, the actual dome, and the tomb in there. Again, these really beautiful gardens and ornamental pools. And then this kind of courtyard. So again, it's quite lavish and extensive. Quranic verses inscribed into the walls of the building and design inlaid with semi-precious stones. These include coral, onyx, carnelian, amethyst, and lapis lazuli, and they really add to the splendor of the Taj's white exterior. So it really is simple. It's got this beautiful white, sort of gleaming, surface, and then you have these sort of semi-precious stones embedded and inlaid into it. It's quite stunning. Some of the Taj Mahal's architecture fuses aspects from other Islamic traditions, but other aspects reflect with indigenous style elements, and that's something to think about with Islam in general, that their territory was so vast and geographically that in addition to their own customs and ways of making art, that they also absorbed indigenous or local traditions as well. And so some of these aspects that do reflect the indigenous style are these domed shape pavilions. These are called shatras, um, and you can see them atop the pavilions and the minarets. So these kind of like almost like a mushroom shaped top. It looks very fairy tale-ish to me. Whereas most Mughal era buildings tended to use red stone for exteriors and functioning architecture such as military buildings and forts, um, they would reserve white marble for special inner spaces or for tombs of holy men. The Taj's entire main structure is constructed of white marble, and the auxiliary buildings are composed of red sandstone. This white and red color scheme of the built complex may correspond with principles laid down in ancient Hindu texts, in which white stood for purity and the priestly class, and red represented the color of the warrior class. So the gardens. Stretching in front of the Taj Mahal is a monumental, it's called a Charbagh garden, spelled Char B and then space BAGH garden. Typically, a Charbagh garden was divided into four main quadrants. So you can kind of see here that illustrated in the floor plan of the Taj Mahal. Um, And then there was, in addition to the four main quadrants, there was a building such as pavilion or tomb along the central axis. When viewed from the main gateway today, the Taj Mahal appears to deviate from this norm, as it is not centrally placed within the garden, but rather located at the end of a complex that is backed by the river, such as was found in other Mughal era pleasure gardens. So instead of the building being centrally located in the garden, it's sort of pushed back here, and then there's a river along here. So it differs in that respect. We have the Matab Bog Moonlight Gardens across the river. However, the monument appears to be centrally located in a grander complex than originally thought. This view, only possible when one incorporates the Yamuna River into the complex, speaks to the brilliance of the architecture. Moreover, by raising the Taj onto an elevated foundation, the builders ensured that Shah Jahan's funerary complex, as well as the tombs of other Mughal nobles, along with their attached gardens, could be viewed from many different angles along the river. The garden incorporates waterways, um, fountains. This was a new type of gardening that was introduced to India by Babur, Shah Jahan's great great grandfather in the 16th century. Given the passage of time and the intervention of many individuals in the garden since its construction, it is hard to deem the original planting and layout scheme of the garden beds of the Taj Mahal originally. So, from the outset, the Taj Mahal was conceived of as a building that would be remembered for its magnificence for ages to come. And to that end, the best material and skills were employed. The finest marble came from quarries 250 miles away in Makarana, Rajasthan. Mir Ab al Karam was designated as the lead architect. Abdul Haq was chosen as the calligrapher, and Ustad Ahmad Lahari was made the supervisor. Shah Jahan made sure the principles of Mughal architecture were incorporated into the design throughout the building process. So when we think of the Taj Mahal, what does it represent? What does it represent? When Mumtaz Mahal died at age 38, gosh, she's young, in 1631, the emperor is reported to have refused to engage in court festivities. He postponed two of his son's weddings and allegedly made frequent visits to his wife's temporary resting place in Burhanapur during the time it took for the building of the Taj to be completed. Um, Stories like this have led to the Taj Mahal being referred to as an architectural symbol of love in popular literature. But there are other theories. One suggests that the Taj is not a funeral monument and that the Shah Jahan might have built a similar structure even if his wife had not died. Um, Based on metaphoric specificity of Quranic and other inscriptions and the emperor's love of thrones, another theory maintains that Taj Mahal is a symbolic representation of a divine throne, the seat of God on the Day of Judgment. A third view holds that the monument was built to represent a replica of a house of paradise. In the paradisical mansion theory, the Taj was something of a vanity project built to glorify Mughal rule and the emperor himself. So those are three theories that you should know in relation to what the Taj Mahal represents. If his accession to the throne was smooth, Shah Jahan's departure from it was not. The emperor died not as a ruler but as a prisoner, regulated to Agra fort under house arrest for 8 years prior to his death in 1666. Shah Jahan could enjoy only a distant view of the Taj Mahal. But um, the resplendent marble mausoleum he built with posterity in mind endures more than 350 years after its construction and is believed to be the most recognizable site in the world today. Laid to rest beside his beloved wife is the Taj Mahal, the man once called Padshah, the king of the world, enjoys enduring fame. Um, for having commissioned the world's most extravagant and memorial mausoleum. All right, so that concludes our unit on Islamic art. Just in summary, some things and points I want you to remember. Although not specifically banned by the Quran, a tradition prohibition against figural art dominates much of the Islamic movement. This did not prove to be an impediment for Muslim artists, however, who formed an endless creative expression of abstract designs based on calligraphy, arabesques, tessellations, which we see here represented in the Taj Mahal and other architecture. Figural art occurs mostly in Persian manuscripts that depict lavishly costumed courtiers recreating famous stories from Arabic literature. Islamic architecture borrows freely from Byzantine, Sassanian, and early Christian sources. Mosques all have niches called mihrabs, which direct the worshippers' attention to Mecca. Religious symbols dominate mosques, but also richly represent the secular buildings, such as tombs or palaces. Um, so anyway, it's quite a difficult unit, I think, just because of the vast territory and because, it's not, it's not like a specific style. It really incorporates a lot of different cultures and geographical, sort of indigenous customs as well. But I really enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it as well. For one of our projects, we're going to be doing calligraphy. So stay tuned.